right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, it's one that we've been trying to get around to for a while now. We actually got a lot of requests for it back when it was in theaters, and we just couldn't get the scheduling right, but here we are doing it. We are covering Jordan Peele's Us. This was, of course, Jordan Peele's follow-up to Get Out, which was just a big, huge cultural phenomenon. And a lot of people were excited to see what he would be doing next. And what he did next, I'd say it was a pretty solid follow-up. I mean, people really did seem to love this movie. We've got a little bit of mixed thoughts on it as we get into this conversation, but overall, I think it was a definite success and certainly a lot of fun to talk about with my returning co-host, Josh Bell, who actually has a new podcast coming out that I am producing called Awesome Movie Year. So we'll be talking about that later in the episode. But, before we get into this conversation, I want to remind you, as always, please make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together on your podcast app of choice. You can follow us on social media at PiecingPod and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, a movie discussion group. All right, let's jump into the conversation about Us. After all this time, let's do it. All right, it's been a long time in the making, but you knew we had to do an episode on Us, so joining me today is Josh Bell. Josh, how you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm all right, man. I'm all right. This is an episode, a lot of people have actually asked me about it. Why didn't we do an Us episode? And, we wanted to, just never got around to it. I had somebody lined up at one point, it fell through, and then we tried to get it happening again, and fell through, and then you suggested you'd be interested in doing it, and I was like, you know what, let's make it happen for the VOD release, and we're finally there.
This is a fascinating movie that has been dissected thoroughly over the last several months, but we can dissect it a little more.
I think if nothing else, this movie will always be remembered for giving birth to the ending explained videos on YouTube. I mean, they existed before, but wow, there's probably 1,000 of them for this movie.
Yeah. The need to over explain everything in movies is a terrible modern online trend, but that's a separate discussion topic.
Yeah, let's not criticize it too much before we even get into any puzzle pieces or anything. So well, all right. So why don't we jump into Us? People have been waiting. What do you got for your first puzzle piece?
All right. Well, my first puzzle piece is a movie that I kind of wished was more of an influence on Us, but is definitely an influence on sort of the first half, and that is The Strangers, Brian Bertino's super scary, very intense home invasion thriller. And Us definitely starts out as that kind of movie. You've got the family in this sort of isolated vacation home, and these mysterious people show up at their doorstep and they don't say anything, and they're wearing strange outfits. And it's super unsettling. And The Strangers is very much, I still remember seeing that movie at like 10 in the morning at a press screening and not knowing anything about it and coming out and just being like, whoa. And that movie is so intense. In The Strangers, it's just a couple. There's no children. But Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman, who play the couple, that they're having some marital difficulties and they're in this sort of remote cabin to get away from things. And these masked invaders show up and just start terrorizing them for no apparent reason. And for me personally, one of the scariest things in a horror movie is when horrible stuff happens and you don't know why. The characters don't know why. Right. The audience doesn't know why. It's just life is horrible and things happen and that's just how it is. And I think Us does a really good job of that in the beginning, when this family is being tortured by their doppelgangers and they don't understand the reason. We don't know where these people came from or what they're doing. And that part of the movie I found the most creepy. And so, it takes a turn kind of maybe halfway-ish through into a different kind of story, which I wasn't as into. But I love The Strangers, and I really liked the parts of Us that most recalled The Strangers.
Well, I will see your strangers and raise you a funny games.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes, that is another very similar one.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be my first one. But yeah, no, and all for very similar reasons. Another, example of the home invasion, just head trip, just fucked up kind of movie. And I completely agree with you. I wish it was more of that. I wish that, of course, what Jordan Peele has done here is set up an entire world that needed to be explored, and there's just no way it could have ever stuck to just that. But I think that when he's doing it really well, because in a way you could look at those scenes and just being like, oh, it's just strangers and funny games again, but he really does seem to have a really great command of it, and and doing stuff that seems new and fresh and scary with that whole kind of a concept, the home invasion concept.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that there are other movies that we could cite that have that similar home invasion structure, but I think he puts a good twist on it. And certainly as I was watching the movie during that part, I was like, wow, this is really I find this kind of horror very scary, and he's doing it really well.
Even the trailer alone was pretty fucking scary.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of really scary, I think more than, and I don't know if we're going to mention it as a puzzle piece, but more than his previous film, Get Out, which is intense but is more of a suspense thriller kind of thing and has a lot of humor to it. Us is much scarier, at least in that first half. And I like that about it.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that was my first puzzle piece, so let's go back to you again for another one.
Okay, well, I'm going to pick something that Jordan Peele himself references at the very beginning of this movie and has talked about in interviews as well, and that is C.H.U.D. You see a VHS copy of C.H.U.D. at the beginning of this movie. And I will say I watched C.H.U.D. for the first time the other day just for this podcast, because I was really determined to include C.H.U.D.
That's why we keep having Josh Bell back, because he does his homework, ladies and gentlemen.
And I will say I kind of liked it.
Yeah?
It is very silly. I mean, I think it's a movie that it has this dopey title.
Yeah.
And it stands for Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers, which is even sillier. And so people think of that and they mock it, and deservedly so, probably. It is a ridiculous title. But as a movie, it's actually kind of is from the early 80s, maybe 82 or something like that. And so it takes place in New York City, and it has that kind of gritty, pre-gentrified New York City vibe to it. And it's a lot about municipal corruption and government sort of sweeping things under the rug. And it's got good performances from John Hurd and Daniel Stern, who play the main characters. And, also sewer mutants. But it's actually, I think it doesn't, it falls apart as it goes on, and they have no idea how to end it, and it just kind of ends. And I was like, well, what about the mutants are still there?
Yeah.
Spoiler for C.H.U.D. But yeah, I mean, obviously Us has these underground dwellers who rise to the surface and create havoc, and are the product of a corrupt government.
Yeah.
And so as silly as C.H.U.D. is, it has a lot of the same themes as this movie, and I think is something that people ought to give a second chance to.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure I saw it in high school, but it's one of those, when you rent 50 horror movies in a row,
right?
And, just don't even remember. One thing about that, because I actually was going to bring up C.H.U.D., one thing that I thought was interesting is that in 1 year, we've had 2 directors pull this trick of having a TV with videotapes next to it in Gaspar Noé's Climax.
Okay.
He has a whole bunch of videotapes of, he's got, Possession and of course, Suspiria and stuff like that, which are clearly showing some of the influences that are about to be on display within the movie we're about to watch,
Right.
you know? And I thought that was kind of cool.
Huh. Yeah, I still haven't seen Climax. I know you're a big fan of it.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
Yeah, that is kind of cool. And I didn't think it was done in a too, like, beating you over the head kind of way.
It's subtle. It's cool.
Yeah. And, Jordan Peele is a total horror geek, and I think he's always happy to show off his love of things like C.H.U.D.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right on. I'll go to my next puzzle piece. My next one is Halloween. I'm just going to go straight in with that. As far as horror movies go and like just kind of straight horror slasher, I think the thing that makes it stand out as a puzzle piece for me and as an inspiration is the idea of bringing horror to the home and to the suburbs. And even once we leave that whole home invasion horror stuff that we were just talking about in the previous pieces, we're still running around homes and houses. And now we get like a modern spin, stuff that could have very easily been at home in the recent Halloween remake, although they didn't do this kind of stuff. But stuff like the Amazon Alexa jokes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff I think would have punched up the Halloween remake quite a bit. I think it would have added a lot of fun modern flavor to the idea of these horror killers coming to the suburbs, you know?
Yeah.
And so yeah, Halloween does that, I think, in a way that a lot of other movies, horror movies, try to emulate.
Yeah, I mean, Halloween obviously is an influence on like nearly every horror movie that came after it.
Sure.
Yeah, I was not super impressed with the recent Halloween
Me
sort of
neither.
reboot or whatever you want to call it. And maybe they should have hired Jordan Peele to do that one instead.
I think he would have done a good job.
Yeah, I agree. But I do love Halloween. The original Halloween is fantastic, is one of my favorite movies ever. So always happy to plug that.
Well, what do you got for your next one?
All right, well, for my next one, I'm going to do a double up because these are two movies that came out like around the same time and were talked about in connection to each other pretty much exclusively at the time that they came out. And they're movies about doppelgangers, so it makes sense to do two of them.
Sure.
And one is Denis Villeneuve's Enemy, starring Jake Gyllenhaal. The other is Richard Oyadi's The Double, starring Jesse Eisenberg. And both of these are movies in which the main star plays two characters who look exactly the same. And in which one of those characters is maybe not evil, certainly not to the extent that the doppelgangers are evil in Us, but not a good person, let's say. And over the course of the movie, the distinctions between the two characters kind of blur, and one character will take over aspects of the other character's life. And of course, I mean, spoilers that we get into here, it's fine, right?
Sure,
So,
absolutely.
at the end of Us, we learn that Lupita Nyong'o, the one version actually took over the life of the other version. And both of these movies play with that idea, I mean, a lot more explicitly from the start, where the characters are like aiming to take over each other's lives or wanting to take over each other's lives, jealous of each other's lives.
Yeah.
And that jealousy too is something you get a lot in this movie. The idea that the underground, the tethered are constantly jealous of the lives of their reflections above the surface. And both of these movies, I think, are uneven, let's say, but they both have really good performances. And I mean, that's something that you have here in Us, is Lupita Nyong'o in particular is just fantastic in this movie, playing very different versions of the same character. And in both of those movies, Jake Gyllenhaal and Jesse Eisenberg do a very good job of playing characters where you can clearly tell the difference, but at the same time, you can really see the connection. And I think that's a tough balance where the characters are distinct from each other, but they're also clearly symbiotic. And to get that as an actor is really impressive. The Double is, I think, a little better. Enemy is very, very strange and also has a giant spider in it. I don't know if you've seen either of these movies. But they're reflections of each other in a way, those two movies.
Yeah. I would bring up Adaptation just because of them being Charlie and Donald Kaufman being real, completing each other in a way. And I was just gonna make a a quick mention of our buddy Chad Clinton Freeman.
Oh,
if
yes.
he was bringing up that combination of puzzle pieces, it would be Enemy and the Lindsay Lohan starring I Know Who Killed
Oh my
Me.
God. I can't say that I've seen that, but knowing Chad, I'm going to guess that he thinks that that movie is secretly brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Well, you know what? And those are great puzzle pieces, and absolutely the whole doppelganger thing has to be discussed within this episode probably quite a bit as we're going through. But my next puzzle piece does include doppelgangers as well. That is the Elisabeth Moss movie, The One I Love.
Oh, that was my next one as well, actually.
Oh, right on, yeah. Which, pretty crazy to see her do doppelgangering multiple times in a career.
Yeah.
That's. I wonder if that's a first, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they're offhand. I know Bette Davis actually made 2 movies in her career where she played her own twin.
Oh, okay.
But I'm sure there's others too, but that just pops into my head.
Okay, so there's a history.
Yes.
There's a history.
Yes.
Okay. But yeah, no, and obviously that's the only thing that these movies really share, is the whole doppelganger angle. But Elisabeth Moss, a great actress, and to be able to pull off that kind of a thing. And of course, a little behind the scenes, we are recording an episode on Elisabeth Moss, Her Smell, at the same time that we're recording this today. So it's Elisabeth Moss Day today.
It is. And that's a good day to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we should have more Elisabeth Moss days. Yeah, that movie is, I think more than just the doppelganger aspect. It's another movie where they go to an isolated sort of vacation home in order to work on their familial issues. Mm-hmm. And while there, they encounter doppelgangers. And those performances, not only Elisabeth Moss, but also Mark Duplass, who plays her husband or boyfriend or whatever in that movie. Yeah. They have to give performances where the doppelgangers are just a little bit different from the original. I seem to remember the explanation in that movie being that the doppelganger versions are like the 20% better version of the character. And I think I remember at the time thinking that I wanted to see the 20% better version of that movie because it's not that great, but Elisabeth Moss is excellent.
Joining me is Josh Bell Hates Everything.
Oh, yeah. No, it's an okay movie. It's a better idea than it is a movie, I think. And Elisabeth Moss is fantastic.
Well, what do you got for your next one?
All right. Well, I'll skip ahead beyond that and then go with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is really what the second half of this movie is about.
Sure.
In particular, there's, I think, 4 different versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And, of course, people know the 1956 original, but also the 1978 version starring Donald Sutherland, which takes place in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, which is where this one is as well. And, gets to the idea of doppelgangers or duplicates taking over the entire world. And that seems to be where this movie is going as we get towards the end of it, that it's expanded from just being this family or this family and their neighbors to being essentially the whole world, although it's not entirely clear how much is being affected. But the idea of the entire population being replaced and, maybe not being able to tell who is the real one and who is the copy is very much something that those movies take on. And the idea of like, well, maybe the doppelgangers have it better or, have it right. And we've screwed up society so badly that maybe it'll be better if monstrous versions of us take over.
Yeah.
So, yeah, both of those movies, the 56 and 78 versions, also reflect the political sort of tone of the time. The 1956 one is a lot about anti-communism and McCarthyism, and in the 1978 version, a lot of stuff about like the me generation and self-help and psychotherapy and things like that were becoming really big at the time. And this movie certainly, in the endless dissections of it, reflects, a divided America that we have right now and income inequality and stuff like that. So I think that the idea of using that to reflect society is something that Jordan Peele is really doing here. Yeah,
no, it's absolutely. It's a heavily political movie. And I think, obviously we'll get into more about, how we like the movie as we get on and towards our closing thoughts and everything. But I think an interesting thing about this movie is understanding those themes really kind of bring out the best in the movie. Whereas it's like, I found it when I first walked out of the theater, not everything had fully quite hit me what he was trying to say. Not until, later as I'm, thinking about it and all. And at first I'm like trying to dissect every last little horror movie cliche. You know what I mean? And like why is that? And why did that? And why did that? Whereas I think it absolutely, those themes are really what it's about when it comes down to it. And I mean, it's pretty, it's a good puzzle piece too. The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because of the way that it used those kind of, those kind of political themes as a main point to the storytelling.
Yeah, I think there's a shot at the end or towards the end of this movie where you pull back and you see all of the tethered kind of hand in hand. And there's definitely moments in Body Snatchers where, in both versions, I think, where it pulls back and you realize the scope of how many of these pod people there really are and how thoroughly they've infiltrated all of society. And it's kind of a moment where it hits you, the impact of that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm going to go with my next puzzle piece. And this one's kind of a little bit of a cheat because it's something that he's said multiple times in the months since this came out, even before it came out while he was doing the press runs. And he even dressed as Jack Torrance during the press tour a couple of times, and that is The Shining.
Yeah.
This one, I mean, I'm no Kubrick expert or anything like that, so I'm not going to get in too deep about why. I just know that it was on his mind a lot of the time. He talked about it plenty, and like I said, even dressing up. I mean, he clearly wanted people to think that he was inspired by it, like no question,
Huh. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously, if he says it, then it must be true.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I'm like, I think maybe if I had the Blu-ray at home already and could like sit and watch it again, maybe I could tell you why exactly that is. But I'm gonna go on his word basically and just mention it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what aspects other than that being a kind of artistically ambitious horror movie that specifically come into play here, but okay, sure.
Hey,
why not?
I guess 2 good movies in a row, he's earned the right to say whatever he wants to be inspired by.
He's not the next Kubrick, at least not yet, but we'll give him that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So what do you got next?
So my last thing is I'm gonna do a combo again, and this is a couple of TV things. The Star Trek episode Mirror Mirror and the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode Doppelgangland. And both of those are episodes in which evil versions of the main characters infiltrate the main action. And Mirror Mirror in particular, I think, has really created sort of the cliches of what the evil twin is. The idea of the evil version of someone having a goatee, for example. I think South Park had a very memorable parody of Mirror Mirror, or at least of that idea. I mean, many, many, many years ago, because South Park has been on for 150 years. But yeah, especially that Star Trek episode. And I think Jordan Peele has possibly cited a Twilight Zone episode as like an influence for this movie, but that's not something I've seen. But I guarantee you he is a Star Trek nerd and has seen the Star Trek episode. And that was the first instance of the quote mirror universe, which has become a big Star Trek sort of running theme, including I think it was been a major aspect of the most recent Star Trek series Discovery, which I haven't watched, but through all the other series, the idea of this alternate universe where evil versions of all our familiar main characters live, and what they want most is to get to our universe and fuck shit up. I think that is very much influenced here. The idea of the tethered and what they want is, and they don't just want to come and kind of hang out. They want to really create havoc here. And in the Buffy episode, that also happens. That has the idea of the sort of the doppelganger being a sexier, more confident version of the timid main character. And that's not quite what we have here, but there is an aspect to that of the doppelganger characters just doing the things that maybe the main characters wish they could do if they weren't constrained by traditional morality. So certainly that is a long-running theme. The evil twin.
Yeah.
No one had a goatee in this movie, I don't think, but I would bet that was under consideration at one point.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see Winston Duke going that route.
Yeah,
but...
yeah.
And just to be clear, for the finished puzzle, it is Doppelgangland?
Yes, Doppelgangland is what it is called.
Gotta
the
make
Buffy
sure.
Episode. Yes.
Yeah, I got to make sure I get that right. So, no, that's great though. And yeah, I mean, especially Star Trek. I mean, you know that Jordan Peele is probably the biggest Trek nerd.
Yes,
you know what I mean? So I could see that completely. All right, yeah, I got one last puzzle piece, and this one's more of an idea, not so much a movie specifically. It is Hitchcock by way of Spielberg by way of M. Night Shyamalan's first few movies. Does that make sense to you?
I don't know, but okay.
Okay, so basically, I think this is, and this is, I don't want to say a backhanded compliment because I did like the movie. I have my issues with it and with Jordan Peele's style as a director. But I feel like this is so much of the Hitchcock suspense, so much of the Spielberg just blockbuster filmmaking, and so much of what made, those first few movies of M. Night Shyamalan so damn great, kind of rolled up into a next on the line of that kind of a filmmaker that takes those influences and puts them together. And I think if this podcast had been around when Get Out came out, I would be saying the exact same puzzle piece right now. I think this is how I would describe Jordan Peele specifically. Not so much the movie itself, but Jordan Peele as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I'm sure Jordan Peele has seen Hitchcock's entire filmography and Spielberg's and maybe Shyamalan's as well. I don't know if he saw The Last Airbender or not, but
maybe not that one.
Yeah, and Hitchcock too. I mean, in preparation for this, I was looking up lists of doppelganger films, and Vertigo is one that comes up a lot. And I don't think thematically it really relates to this movie, but certainly that's something that Hitchcock had on his mind in films that he made. And I remember thinking after seeing this movie, and not as much after seeing it, but also after reading all the interviews with Jordan Peele, where he explained it all way too much, and talked about this giant mythology that he had come up with for the tethered and who they are and what they mean. It very much reminded me of early M. Night Shyamalan, where you're like, dude, just shut up. Stop explaining things, and please don't make a sequel in which the exposition is the point.
Yeah.
And so hopefully Jordan Peele will not go that route. Shyamalan has had a up and down career, but I really don't want to see the Jordan Peele version of Glass. I think that would be a tragedy.
Well, luckily, I think he's a smart enough dude to not let that happen. But I mean, then again, who knows?
Yeah, I hope you're right.
Who knows? All right, let's do our finished puzzle, and then we'll get to any closing thoughts. We've got The Strangers, Funny Games, C.H.U.D, Halloween, Enemy, The Double, The One I Love, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the Mirror Mirror episode of Star Trek, Doppelgangland episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Hitchcock by way of Spielberg by way of M. Night Shyamalan. One other thing I wanted to mention, I mentioned Spielberg. So I like this movie. I didn't love this movie. There are things about it, especially like that whole having to do big long exposition dumps is kind of, a shame. But there are things in the first 30 minutes of this movie that reminded me of like the best of a great Spielberg movie. I thought, I was so in for those first 30 minutes, and no matter what happens after that, it really with any movie, if a movie has got me that good in the first 30, I'm at least gonna like it, no matter if things start to fall apart a little bit, things get a little too, up its own ass a little bit. I'm still gonna give it a lot of credit because I think he's got a lot of style. He put together a very interesting movie, and And I said the same damn thing about Get Out. It's a movie that has you talking. We'll be talking about this movie at the end of the year still, no question. He knows how to make a movie that keeps people, really wanting to engage and talk about it like for a long time.
Yeah, that's true. I think maybe I got a little worn out on that. I agree with you that the beginning really grabs you, and I would say the first half or so, again, when it's more about home invasion and horror and just what is happening, we don't know why, but we got to deal with it and run away and just stay alive. I liked a lot. I felt like, the exposition and the expansion of it into this whole mythology and the idea that this was something that was happening all over the world or whatever didn't quite work for me. And I think, you were saying also that the various political or social allegory aspects of it made it more interesting to you. And I felt like that made it less interesting to me, that I liked it as a movie that was just about like, here's some crazy stuff that happened and it was intense and I was in it in the moment. Yeah. And the more I read the various think pieces about it, which are not the movie's fault, but also Jordan Peele's own explanations of it, which are his fault. Although not the movie, you could separate the movie from his commentary on it and just watch it as a movie on its own. And I think that I liked better than the more I read and the more I saw people's takes on it, the more tired of it I got.
I get it.
So, but it is an interesting, like the fact that you can look at it so many different ways and interpret it in so many different ways. I mean, there were a lot of pieces where you could read it in one way and then you can see an article that was essentially coming at it in the opposite way. And both of those enforcing their points and being completely confident in that this is what this movie is about, that certainly is something fascinating. But I like this movie most as just like an in the moment thing that can freak you out.
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of almost an up and down kind of thing, which is very strange. It's like I like the movie from the beginning and getting into the home invasion stuff, and then I start to dislike how instead of getting any kind of a form of answers, so to speak, we're getting just, like you said, all the mythology and all that stuff, which really doesn't answer anything. It's just adding to it. So that's when the political stuff kind of comes in and saves it again for me. So I think that's what I mean, more so than it makes it better. It actually saves it from itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And it definitely does. The more exposition they throw at you in this movie, the less it makes sense.
Right, exactly.
And the more you question how this all fits together.
Yeah.
Whereas when you know nothing, you don't have to question it because it's just like, okay, let's just go. Nobody knows. The characters don't know.
Yeah.
This is just deal with it. And like I said, that's the kind of horror that I am most drawn to generally, where it's like, why does this happen? I don't know. Why is there another family coming up from underground that looks just like us?
Yeah.
'Cause there is.
Because C.H.U.D.
Right, because C.H.U.D. Because Jordan Peele watched C.H.U.D. That is the reason. Yeah, but I still think this is a good movie, and I do think it's something that we'll be talking about, through to the end of the year as one of the most notable movies of the year. And certainly Lupita Nyong'o's performance, which maybe we didn't mention enough. Like, she's fantastic in this movie.
Yeah.
Playing those dual characters and making them distinctive and yet clearly connected. That, if nothing else in this movie is super, like, just top notch. Very good.
Completely agree. She makes you realize that it is crazy that she's just a CGI creation in the Star Wars movie.
Yes.
So, hey, we finally did it. We finally had an episode on Us.
Hooray.
Congratulations to Us. Josh Bell, you got anything else you watched recently you want to recommend?
Well, speaking of political content, I will recommend the Catch-22 miniseries on Hulu. Produced by George Clooney, who directs a couple episodes and co-stars. It's a modern prestige miniseries, which means maybe it's a little longer than it needs to be, but I think it's a well-done balance of adapting a novel that a lot of people say is unadaptable, and getting political material that it takes place in World War II, but showing how it's relevant today, balancing the satirical aspects of it and the very dark, kind of bleak aspects of this story about a soldier who just wants to go home. I really like how it approaches World War II. We don't see, even now, pretty much any piece of media, any story that you get about World War II is always about, even if it's horrifying and there's death and horrible conditions, it's always the cause is noble and people are there for the right reasons. And Catch-22 really says, like, you know what, this was just as futile as any war. And I like that about it. So it's an interesting thing. I think it's worth the time investment. And also the 1970 feature film version directed by Mike Nichols, which was a big flop at the time, I watched, also is available on Amazon Prime. And I think is actually maybe even better. It plays up the satirical dark humor aspect more. And Alan Arkin is great as the star of that. Christopher Abbott, who's the star of the Hulu version, is also very good. But different approaches to the same material, but both good. Catch-22.
Right on. And you got anything you want to plug?
Well, the big thing we want to plug, of course, is the new podcast,
Yeah.
Awesome Movie Year.
Awesome Movie Year.
We are launching, hosted by me and Jason Harris, produced by Dave, who will occasionally be offering his own commentary. And we are tackling a different year in movies in each of our little seasons, taking a look at 12 different films to kind of give you a snapshot of the year. We're starting with 1994. Looking at things like the top movie at the box office and the best picture winner and a future cult classic and other stuff like that. So hopefully people will listen to that, and it is launching on July 3rd.
And you guys can all check out the show notes. We're going to have all kinds of info on how to find that once it is up. And we will make sure you get to check out Awesome Movie Year. It's going to be a great show.
It's going to be an awesome show.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Well, Josh, thanks as always for being here, and I'm looking forward to having you back.
Sounds good.
Testing. Can anyone hear me? My name is Toby. I'm one of the hosts of the Secret Transmission podcast. We do a satire show all about conspiracies, UFOs, the paranormal, cryptozoology, true crime, and much more. Our show is transmitted to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and many other podcast apps. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Secret Transpod. We hope you come listen to us try to explain the unexplainable.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation about us. Of course, I hope you've watched the movie now that it's out on VOD. If not, you just got a whole lot of spoilers, but you could still enjoy the movie anyway. But you really should have watched it first. I mean, we know that that's kind of the theme of this show, is that you watch the movie and then you come listen to us break down all these things and try to figure out inspirations and all that kind of stuff. So you know what you're getting into with piecing it together. You should know that by now. So anyway, as always, I want to remind you to please make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together on your podcast app of choice. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Cast, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and a whole bunch of other apps. And if you are an Apple Podcast user and you enjoy the show, we'd love it if you rated us 5 stars and left us a review. We want to know what you're thinking of the show, so definitely let us know. You can also join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, which is where we talk about all of these movies and lots of other movies. And there's a lot of great people in that group, and we would love for you to join us. That does it for today. Why don't we get in and out real quick here at this one? So it's a little bit of a short episode, but it looks like we're going to hit the 40-minute mark once my music plays. But let's play a piece of music. I'm thinking for a movie about the tethered and having this dark opposite self. Why don't we go with a track called Enemy from my most recent album, A Different Kind of Dream. I think this fits the theme pretty well.
and all points west.